everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Kerry Parker. Today we have episode 467 for February 9th, 2026. Got a big news show for you today, so I'll keep the intro short. Real quick, though, I do want to say that I have gone through all of the listener responses. Thank you again to everybody who sent in the survey. I'm going to go through some of those highlights next week. But real quick, a couple things. First of all, someone said, hi, Kerry, in the comments, because I said I read them all. Well, I do, so hi back, whoever you are. And also, there were several suggestions of people that I should bring on the show for an interview. And heads up, I've actually already booked some of them. How about that? I'll tell you more about that after the news. All right, so a quick rundown of the stories we got for you today. There was a big lawsuit filed against WhatsApp claiming that they have no true end-to-end encryption. I'm going to give you someone else's take on that and then my own comments. There was an AI toy, two words that should never go together, that exposed 50,000 logs of chats with their kids. There was another AI chat app that was pretty popular that leaked millions of users' private conversations. I haven't talked much about the TikTok thing, but there is a new story about their changes in their terms of service after the U.S. takeover. And the U.S. has decided that they want to gather a ridiculous amount of information about travelers to the country. It hasn't been decided yet, but it's troubling, and I want to give you a heads up. The Salt Typhoon communications systems attacks have affected the UK, not just the US. Also in the UK, police are rolling out even more cameras and facial recognition technology. That's very troubling. And adding AI into the mix, which is troubling on many levels. The FBI apparently couldn't get into a Washington Post reporter's phone because they had lockdown mode turned on. So we're going to talk about why that could be a very important feature for you. Google just updated some cool anti-theft protections in Android. California City has turned off flock cameras after discovering that the company shared data where they shouldn't be. Google has taken down a big home proxy network, and I'll explain what that's about. And then Mozilla adds a one-click option to disable all of their AI features, which honestly I wish everybody would do. And then we have my tip of the week, where I'm going to tell you a little bit about agentic AI and why you should be avoiding it, at least for now. All right, lots to talk about. Let's get to it. This is from Matthew Green. He does pretty good work, and it's a very long article, but I'm just going to kind of give you a taste of it. There was a lawsuit that was filed recently claiming that WhatsApp, the messenger from Meta or Facebook, basically has no end-to-end encryption. Or at the very least, Meta is able to look at anybody's communications. That is a really big claim, and as we like to say, extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. Now, this lawsuit has just been filed. We're kind of short on details, and we'll probably learn more as this goes on. But it's caused a lot of concern, and I wanted to read some highlights here from Matt's long article on this, because I think it has some good points to make even beyond this particular case. Okay, so Matt says, it's not every day that we see mainstream media get excited about encryption apps. For that reason, the past several days have been fascinating, since we've been given not one, but several unusual stories about the encryption used in WhatsApp. Or, more accurately, if you read the story, a pretty wild allegation that the widely used app lacks encryption. Our story begins with the new class action lawsuit filed by the esteemed law firm Quinn Emanuel on behalf of several plaintiffs. The lawsuit notes that WhatsApp claims to use end-to-end encryption to protect its users, but alleges that all WhatsApp users' private data is secretly available through a special terminal on Mark Zuckerberg's desk. Okay, the lawsuit doesn't say precisely that, but it comes pretty darn close. The complaint isn't very satisfying, nor does it offer any solid evidence for any of these claims. Nonetheless, the claims have been heavily amplified online by various predictable figures, such as Elon Musk and Pavel Durov, both of whom, coincidentally, operate competing messaging apps. Making things a bit more exciting, Bloomberg reports that U.S. authorities are now investigating Meta, the owner of WhatsApp, based on these same allegations. If you're really looking to understand what's being claimed here, the best way to do it is to read the complaint yourself, and you can do it here, and that's a link to the complaint. Alternatively, you can save yourself a lot of time and read the next 5 sentences, which contain pretty much the same amount of factual information. And there's 3 points here in 5 sentences. 1, the plaintiffs' users of WhatsApp have all used WhatsApp for years. 2, through this entire period, WhatsApp has advertised that it uses end-to-end encryption to protect message content, specifically through the use of signal encryption protocol. And then finally 3, according to unspecified quote-unquote whistleblowers, since 2016, WhatsApp, owned by Meta, has been able to read the messages of every single user on its platform, except for some celebrities. The internet has mostly divided itself into people who already know these allegations are true because they don't trust Meta, and of course Meta can read your messages, and a second set of people who also don't trust Meta but mostly think this is unsupported nonsense. Since I've worked on end-to-end encryption for the last 15 plus years, and I've specifically focused on the kind of systems that drive apps like WhatsApp, iMessage, and Signal, I tend to fall into the latter group. But that doesn't mean there's nothing to pay attention to here. The best thing about end-to-end encryption, when it works correctly, is that the encryption is performed in an app on your own phone. In principle, this means that only you and your communication partner have the keys, and all those keys are under your control. While this sounds perfect, there's an obvious caveat. While the app runs on your phone, it's a piece of software, and the problem with most software is you probably didn't write it. In the case of WhatsApp, the application software is written by a team inside of Meta. This wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing if the code was open source, and outside experts could review the implementation. Unfortunately, WhatsApp is closed source, which means that you cannot easily download the source code to see if the encryption is performed correctly or performed at all. Nor can you compile your own copy of the WhatsApp app and compare it to the version you download from the Play or App Store. As a user, you are to some extent trusting that WhatsApp is not running a long con on its 3 billion users. If you're a distrustful, paranoid person, or if you're a security engineer, you'd probably find this need for trust deeply unappealing. Given the closed source nature of WhatsApp, how do we know that WhatsApp is actually encrypting its data? The company is very clear in its claim that it does encrypt. But if we accept the possibility that they're lying, is it at least possible that WhatsApp contains a secret backdoor that causes it to secretly exfiltrate a copy of each message, or perhaps just the encryption keys, to a special server at Meta? I cannot definitively tell you that this is not the case. I can, however, tell you that if WhatsApp did this, that 1, they would get caught, 2, the evidence would almost certainly be visible in WhatsApp's application code, and 3, it would expose WhatsApp and Meta to exciting new forms of ruin. The most important thing to keep in mind here is that Meta's encryption happens on the client application, the one you run on your phone. If the claims in this lawsuit are true, then Meta would have to alter the WhatsApp application so that plain text or unencrypted data would be uploaded from your app's message database to some infrastructure at Meta, or else the keys would. And this would not be some rare occasional glitch. The allegations in the lawsuit state that this is applied to nearly all users for every message ever sent by those users since they signed up. Those constraints would tend to make this a very detectable problem. Even if WhatsApp app source code is not public, many historical versions of the compiled app are available for download. You can pull one down right now and decompile it using various tools to see if your data or keys are being exfiltrated. I freely acknowledge that this is a big project that requires specialized expertise. Still, reverse engineering WhatsApp's client code is entirely possible, and various parts of the app have indeed been reversed several times by various security researchers. The answer really is knowable, and if there is a crime, then the evidence is almost certainly right there in the code that we're all running on our phones. If you're going to metaphorically commit a crime, doing it in a forensically detectable manner is very stupid. It's been more than 40 years since Ken Thompson delivered his famous talk, Reflections on Trusting Trust. And then, by the way, that's a link to a very interesting talk, a classic talk that you might want to check out, which pointed out that there is no avoiding some level of trust. Hence, the question here is not, should we trust someone? That decision is already taken. It's, should we trust that WhatsApp is not running the biggest fraud in technology history? The decision to trust WhatsApp on this point seems perfectly reasonable to me in the absence of any concrete evidence to the contrary. In return for making that assumption, you get to communicate with 3 billion people who use WhatsApp. But this is not the only choice you can make. If you don't trust WhatsApp, and there are reasonable non-conspiratorial arguments not to, then the correct answer is to move to another application. I recommend Signal. All right, so I tend to agree with this analysis. Open source is great, but you can actually pick apart closed source code using specialized tools you can decompile it and actually look and see what it's doing. And people have done that. And I would be shocked if this is really true. Now, I don't want to get conspiratorial. There may be some other interesting ways to do this. For instance, there could be a ghost protocol kind of thing set up where Meta is adding a secret, unshown third party to every one-on-one conversation, turning it into a group chat, but not showing that there's somebody listening in. But even if they did that, again, that would be visible in the code for people who know what they're doing. And people have reverse engineered this code. This would be really hard to hide, especially now that these allegations have come out. I'm sure they're going to bring all sorts of extra scrutiny. We'll see what comes of this. Also, as part of the legal process, this lawsuit may produce some really interesting legal discovery materials. So we might learn more about this just by virtue of this lawsuit going forward. But it would be really hard for Meta to pull this off. And if they ever got caught doing this, it would be game over. But I will also say the fact that Meta has taken their code, which is based on Signal, by the way, which is very secure and open source, and made it closed source for their app, for their WhatsApp app, is inviting these trust problems. And they have shown time and time again that they will go to great lengths to mine and monetize your data. We have good reason not to trust them. So anyway, these allegations are pretty out there, and I will definitely need to see more information before I would believe it. All right, next up, this is from Wired, and it's about an AI toy, which those two things should never be put together. Anyway, let me read this article and then we'll talk about it. Earlier this month, Joseph Thacker's neighbor mentioned to him that she'd pre-ordered a couple of stuffed dinosaur toys for her children. She chose the toys called Bondus, B-O-N-D-U-S, because they offered an AI chat feature that lets children talk to the toy like a kind of machine learning-enabled imaginary friend. But she knew Thacker, a security researcher, had done work on AI risks for kids, and she was curious about his thoughts. So Thacker looked into it. Within just a few minutes of work, he and a web security researcher friend named Joel Margolis made a startling discovery. Bondu's web-based portal, intended to allow parents to check on their children's conversations and for Bondu's staff to monitor the product's use and performance, also let anyone with a Gmail account access transcripts of virtually every conversation Bondu's child users have ever had with the toy. Without carrying out any actual hacking, simply by logging in with an arbitrary Google account, the two researchers immediately found themselves looking at children's private conversations, the pet names kids had given their Bondu, the likes and dislikes of the toy's toddler owners, and their favorite snacks and dance moves. In total, Margolis and Thacker discovered that the data Bondu left unprotected, accessible to anyone who logged into the company's public-facing web console with their Google username, including children's names, birth dates, family member names, objectives for the child chosen by a parent, and most disturbingly, detailed summaries and transcripts of every previous chat between the child and their Bondu, a toy practically designed to elicit intimate one-on-one conversation. Bondu confirmed in conversations with the researchers that more than 50,000 chat transcripts were accessible through the exposed web portal, essentially all the conversations the toys had engaged in other than those that had been manually deleted by the parents or staff. When Thacker and Margolis alerted Bondu to its glaring data exposure, they say, the company acted to take down the console in a matter of minutes before relaunching the portal the next day with proper authentication measures. While Bondu's near-total lack of security around the children's data that it stored may be fixed, the researchers argued that what they saw represents a larger warning about the dangers of AI-enabled chat toys for kids. Their glimpse of Bondu's back end showed how detailed the information is that is stored on children, keeping histories of every chat to better inform the toy's next conversation with its owner. Even now that the data is secured, Margolis and Thacker argued that it raises questions about how many people inside companies that make AI toys have access to the data they collect, how their access is monitored, and how well their credentials are protected. This is a quote from Margolis, who says, quote, "There are cascading privacy implications from this. All it takes is one employee to have a bad password, and then we're back in the same place we started, where it's all exposed to the public internet," unquote. Margolis adds that this sort of sensitive information about a child's thoughts and feelings could be used for horrific forms of child abuse and manipulation. And Margolis says, quote, "To be blunt, this is a kidnapper's dream. We're talking about information that lets somebody lure a child into a really dangerous situation, and it was essentially accessible to anybody," unquote. Margolis and Thacker point out that beyond its accidental data exposure, Baidu also, based on what they saw inside its admin console, appears to use Google's Gemini and OpenAI's ChatGPT, and as a result, may share information about kids' conversations with those companies. So the article goes on. I think you get the gist of it there, though, and I will say that Baidu admitted to using these third-party AI services when asked, but they say they minimize the data that is sent and have contractual agreements that the data won't be used to train their AI models. For what that's worth. But okay, so if it's not obvious already, do not give your kids anything with a cloud-based AI, period. I would say I can't think of an exception to that. Now, we may get to the point where all the AI processing can be done on the device, but we are not there yet, certainly not with a cheap toy. So if you basically ever have to connect, a quote-unquote smart toy to an app or to Wi-Fi, I would assume that it is sending data to the cloud. So this actually gives me a great time to bring out this quote that is just fantastic. And I think I first heard this from Nate at Privacy Guides, who said, "You're not giving your kid access to the internet. You're giving the internet access to your kid." And so that is a great little maxim to keep in mind the next time you're looking for a smart toy for a kid. All right, so here's another fun AI story, and this one's from 404 Media. And it's about another leak of chat information from an AI bot. And it says, Chat and Ask AI, that's all one term, that's the name of an app or a service, one of the most popular AI apps on Google Play and Apple app stores that claims more than 50 million users, left hundreds of millions of those users' private messages with the app's chatbot exposed, according to an independent security researcher and emails viewed by 404 Media. The exposed chats show users asked the app, "How do I painlessly kill myself? How to write suicide notes? How to make meth, and how to hack various apps." The exposed data was discovered by an independent security researcher who goes by Harry. The issue is a misconfiguration in the app's usage of the mobile app development platform, Google Firebase, which by default makes it easy for anyone to make themselves an authenticated user who can access the app's back-end storage where in many instances user data is stored. Harry said that he had access to 300 million messages from more than 25 million users in the exposed database, and that he extracted and analyzed a sample of 60,000 users and 1 million messages. The database contained user files with a complete history of their chats with the AI, timestamps for those chats, the name they gave the app's chatbot, how they configured the model, and which specific model they used. Chat and Ask AI is made by Turkish developer Codeway. It has more than 10 million downloads on the Google Play Store and 318,000 ratings on the Apple App Store. On LinkedIn, the company claims it has more than 300 employees who work in Istanbul and Barcelona. Harry disclosed the vulnerability to Codeway on January 20th. It exposed data of not just Chat and Ask AI users, but users of other popular apps developed by Codeway. The company fixed the issue across all of its apps within hours, according to Harry. Okay, so I'm sure that is small consolation to anyone whose data was leaked or exposed. I guess we don't know for sure that someone else found this and downloaded it, but it didn't sound like it was too hard to find. And let's face it, this is blackmail material. There's some really sensitive stuff here, which is why I beg you, when you do use AI, if you do use AI, when you talk to these chatbots, do not give it any personal information. Certainly not to any of these cloud-based AI systems, which is just about all of them today. You can run a local LLM. I've talked about that on the show before, and I've got a whole blog article on that if you want to go find that at firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com. And someday we may get to the point where the privacy stuff is figured out or everything is always running on your device so it doesn't have to go to the cloud, but we are not there yet. But also, as this goes to show, be very careful when using any wrapper apps or plugins for these AI tools, because now you're not only trusting the AI tool and AI service itself, but you're now trusting this third party. And I'm here to tell you, in the gold rush for AI anything today, everyone's trying to find some way to put AI in their stuff, and they are not doing it securely. Okay, so we were all afraid that TikTok was going to go away. We were threatening to ban it in the United States unless we came up with a deal, and then we came up with the deal. Turns out the deal was dumb. It really didn't do anything to solve our privacy problems. It just shifted them. And TikTok, now owned by this weird consortium of companies and run by Oracle, has just changed its terms of service in some pretty disturbing ways. So this is from Lifehacker. Big changes have come to social media platform TikTok. On January 22nd, TikTok's operations were passed from Chinese company ByteDance to TikTok USDS joint venture, a new entity backed by Larry Ellison's Oracle, private equity firm Silver Lake, and United Arab Emirates-based investment firm MGX. Days later, on January 23rd, and that's actually just one day later, TikTok introduced new terms of service for users. So far, the transition has not been smooth. Users immediately raised privacy concerns over the new TOS. While TikTok's new terms sound draconian, they aren't that vastly different from TikTok's old terms of service, which were draconian. The main change covers AI. The company added a new section to its terms of service saying it will collect information from, quote, AI interactions, including prompts, questions, files, and other types of information that you submit to our AI-powered interfaces, as well as the responses they generate, unquote. So don't think the conversation you have will stay between you and the chatbot. TikTok also says it will collect precise location data unless users opt out. This will let the service collect users' exact coordinates instead of a general city or region, which the company will use to serve customized ads and other sponsored content. Other than that, the terms remain largely the same as they were before. TikTok says it collects data that is user-provided, inferred, or contextual, that includes location data, age, email, phone numbers, chat messages, metadata on anything you upload, religious beliefs, mental or physical health diagnosis, sexual life or sexual orientation, immigration status, and more. Then it uses the data to advertise to you, to infer additional information about you, train its algorithm, and basically anything else it's legally allowed to use it for, which in the US is just about anything. If you prefer that TikTok collect less of your personal data, you can go to the settings and privacy page in the app and opt out of targeted ads outside of TikTok, using off TikTok activity for ad targeting, turn off location tracking, stop contact syncing, and make other changes. You can also go to the phone settings page, select TikTok, and change its permissions to track your location. TikTok's new management vowed last month to retrain the platform's recommendation algorithm, quote, on U.S. user data to ensure the content feed is free from outside manipulation, unquote. What being free of outside manipulation looks like in a practical sense has yet to be seen. Okay, so this whole TikTok thing was a complete farce. It was really a joke. If they were worried about privacy, what we really need to do in the U.S. is pass privacy laws. At the end of the day, the ownership is still, I think, 19.9% ByteDance, and I think it was 20% before the sale. So if you're doing the math, that's 0.1% difference. And now it's owned by Oracle, who is a data broker, and the privacy policy has gotten worse. It was bad to begin with. It is just ridiculous. I would strongly recommend you do not use TikTok. I will say, by the way, that our friends over at Privacy Safe have a tool for you to look at TikTok stuff. If someone sends you a TikTok URL, for example, and you're not using the app, you can actually look at it privately and anonymously using their tool called StickTok. And that's StickTock. And actually, if you just replace TikTok.com with StickTalk.com, it'll work. I'll put a link in the show notes. I will also say that our friends at Internet Safety Labs did a really long comparison of TikTok before and after this sale with lots of really interesting data and some basically the same conclusions we just drew here. I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. It's really long, but it's got a lot of great information and some appendices that have lots of data. So if you're curious, check that out as well. All right, next up, this is from Privacy International, and it's really disturbing. It's just proposed right now. This is not a done deal, but it sounds really bad, and I want you to be aware of it because I really think we need to push back on this. All right, so let me read this, and then I'll give you my commentary. Yesterday, the Trump administration announced a proposed change in policy for travelers to the U.S. It applies to the powers of data collection by the Customs and Border Police, or the CBP. If the proposed changes are adopted after the 60-day consultation, and that's the key there, then millions of travelers to the U.S. will be forced to use a U.S. government mobile phone app, submit their social media from the last 5 years, and email addresses used in the last 10 years, including of family members. They're also proposing the collection of DNA. So these changes include, and I think this is actually directly copied from this proposal. And it says, 1, All visitors must submit their social media from the last 5 years. To ESTA, or the Electronic System for Travel Authorization, applications will include high-value data fields when feasible, and these include telephone numbers used in the last 5 years, email addresses used in the last 10 years, family telephone numbers used in the last 5 years, biometrics including face, fingerprint, DNA, and iris, business telephone numbers used in the last 5 years, business email addresses used in the last 10 years. All these travelers will now have to use an app provided by CBP called CBP Home and an app for their ESTA application called the ESTA mobile app. The ESTA website is being decommissioned, in other words, meaning you will have to use the app. The CBP Home mobile app will be used by people to provide biometric proof of their departure, I don't know what that means, to close the information gap. The app will disclose the user's location once they have left the U.S. and run a liveness detection on the selfie photo. So in other words, it's trying to prevent someone from just holding up a picture. If approved, this policy would apply to all visitors who currently travel without a visa, and I'll come back to discuss that here in a minute. For the estimated 14 million annual ESTA travelers, in other words, those who don't need visas, CBP thinks that this will take the average visitor 22 minutes to submit themselves and their family members. The inclusion of DNA is particularly alarming. The U.S. government is setting the ground for the day when it can require the DNA of all travelers. As Ed Hasbrook helpfully points out, and that's a link to an article, I guess, currently no mobile phone enables the collection of DNA samples. But this is not stopping the U.S. government's ambitions for that strange future. As we previously stated earlier in 2025, the Trump administration early on declared its expanded surveillance ambitions. Yesterday's announcement is the next step, extending it to visa-free travel and expanding the dataset to include DNA. Over 70 million people visit the U.S. every year, which means that it could end up being a vast data store of people's data. With email accounts, the purpose of demanding 10 years of email identifiers is bewildering even to us. The usefulness of mass surveillance of 10 years' worth of business email communications to determine a family's visit to Disney World seems not just disproportionate, but also a legal and computational nightmare. For social media, it's unlikely there will be a U.S. government official looking through your photos, videos, likes, and shares as you queue to be fingerprinted. More likely is that AI tools will be used to scan and summarize all of your social media behaviors to ascertain what kind of person you and your family members are and who you associate with, like, and follow. This may lead to AI-enabled automated decisions that have significant consequences to people's lives and livelihood. Many governments follow the U.S.'s lead on border surveillance. European governments are currently launching their own biometric registration program for visitors that will include vast data collection, all at a cost to travelers. We must urgently curb this trend. People deserve rights wherever they are. This is why human rights are universal and why constitutions limit the power of governments. Fundamental protections and safeguards should apply to all people, including at borders. Governments should be calling out these abuses, protecting us from this treatment, and in turn, living up to these commitments. Okay, so this is just a proposal, but it's a proposal. And it's absolutely horrendous. I mean, this amount of data collection is just wrong. And I'm sure they're going to be using AI tools. There's no other way they could possibly sift through this much information. And we all know how accurate AI tools can be, which is to say that they make a lot of mistakes. And this is just a complete recipe for disaster. I'd love to travel to other countries, but if I had to submit to this to visit a country, I probably just wouldn't go. And I wouldn't blame anybody for saying, you know what, screw it. I am not going to go through that to go to the United States. And I think that's a perfectly rational decision to make, which sucks. This is just horrendous. I realize it's just a proposal, and we could only hope that cooler heads will prevail. But in the current climate right now in the United States, I am concerned that this or something very close to this will, in fact, be implemented, and it will be awful. And I will just say, and I mean, obviously I can't speak for my entire country, but as a U.S. citizen, I apologize. This is horrible. I hope this is defeated. It doesn't appear to be in the Federal Register yet. That's federalregister.gov. That's where these things get posted for comment. That's the 60-day comment period. I think it's supposed to be posted on the 9th of this month, which is tomorrow. You could either go to the Federal Register and try to find it, which would be tough, But my guess is if you go to the show notes and find this article, I'm hoping that Privacy International will post a link to the Federal Register entry where you could leave a comment. I certainly plan to leave a comment as soon as it's available. Oh, and I had to look this up because I'm a citizen. I don't travel to my own country and don't have to go through this rigmarole, but apparently it's kind of falls into one of two camps. There are some countries that require you to have a visa to visit the United States. There's a lot of countries in Africa, a lot of Asia, and parts of Latin America that have to go through a visa application process, which can be invasive, but by the way, not nearly as invasive as what this proposal is. And then if you're on the visa waiver program, which is a lot of other European and other countries where you don't need a visa to come for 90 days or less, you are the ones that are going to be subject to this ridiculous proposal. So this is horrendous. And again, I hope it is soundly defeated. Next one's from the Register. Chinese state-linked hackers are accused of spending years inside the phones of senior Downing Street officials, exposing private communications at the heart of the UK government. The Telegraph reports that the activity focused on phones used by senior aides around former Prime Ministers Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and Rishi Sunak, with the suspected access stretching back to 2021. The intelligence sources described the compromise as extensive, with one saying the activity went right into the heart of Downing Street, although it remains unclear whether the Prime Minister's own devices were accessed directly. Salt Typhoon, the Chinese-linked group previously blamed for telecom intrusions overseas, and in that case I think they mean here in the US, has been named as a likely culprit in the reported snooping. The espionage outfit is known for breaking into telecoms providers, enabling them to skim metadata and communications without ever needing to install anything on a handset. Even without full access to message content or live calls, call logs and location data are often enough to build a clear picture of who is talking to whom, how frequently, and from where. Intelligence officials quoted by the Telegraph said attackers may have been able to read texts or listen in on calls involving senior figures, but added that the metadata alone would have been useful. The Telegraph reports that there were many separate attacks on Downing Street staff phones and wider government communications, particularly during Sunak's time in office. MI5 issued an espionage alert to Parliament last November, warning of Chinese state spying, but neither the scope nor the impact of the suspected telecoms compromise has been detailed publicly. As with the previous Salt Typhoon cases, the hardest part may not be working out what was accessed, but proving that the attackers are no longer there. So yeah, the U.S. was hit with Salt Typhoon, very similar kind of a thing. They were in there for a long time. They were accessing lots of communications without having to compromise the individual devices themselves. And a lot of this it's important to remember, was because we have built-in wiretapping capabilities that come from the equipment manufacturers, and it's built into the system to comply with lawful intercept requirements spelled out in laws like the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, or CALEA, that we have here in the U.S., but other countries have similar laws. And so equipment manufacturers for these telecom companies build in backdoors so that they can comply with these, spying laws. Now, a lot of this stuff is warrant-based wiretapping, which that's fine. But the takeaway again here is that you cannot make a backdoor that only good guys can go through. Now, we don't know if these were the mechanisms that were used in particular, but from what I've read, certainly these were part of it. And of course, there's also just, unfortunately, a lot of vulnerabilities and a lot of very old networking protocols and frameworks that is underpinning all of our telecommunications worldwide that have just not been fixed. We're actually going to get into this a little bit when I interview Nick Merrill from Freely. All right, next up, another UK story, and this is from Sky News. Dozens of new facial live recognition vans will be delivered to police forces under sweeping reforms announced by the Home Secretary. Under Shabana Mahmood's proposals, the biggest shakeup in policing in decades, the current number of 10 vans will rise to 50 and will be overseen by a National Center on Artificial Intelligence. Live facial recognition vans are used to catch people on police watch lists, find missing and vulnerable individuals, and deter criminal behavior. Ms. Mahmood told the Commons some police forces are, quote, fighting crime in the digital age with analog methods, unquote. The move comes as part of major changes revealed in the government's white paper on police reforms, which seeks to also create a British FBI, that's in quotes, called the National Police Service, or NPS, and drastically cut the number of police forces. Ms. Mahmood also announced in the Commons that all forces across England and Wales will be given AI tools to help reduce the amount of time that officers must spend behind a desk, allowing them to be on the beat more instead. She told MPs that the government will invest more than £140 million in new technologies to assist officers in the fight against crime. The Home Office has called the changes the biggest reform to policing since the police were professionalized 2 centuries ago. Okay, so again, my understanding is this is just a proposal, so I don't know if there's an ability to push back on this before it becomes permanent. But if this is something that bothers you, and I would think it would, I would get out there and make your voice heard. I haven't been to London in a long time, but my understanding is that London has a ridiculous number of cameras and that the police are free to use facial recognition with very little restraint. I know they've been known to set up portable facial recognition systems around public areas, and they post signs around the area saying that, you're under surveillance. And there was a much shared story about one guy several years ago who was walking through one of these areas, saw that there was facial recognition, pulled up his coat and pulled down his hat and tried not to be seen, basically. The cops saw this, pulled him over, gave him a lot of crap for it, and he got angry and cursed at him, and they gave him a £90 fine for the cursing. Apparently not for the avoiding facial recognition, but I'm sure that didn't help. But basically, this guy was presumed to be suspicious because he didn't want his face to be part of some database. And that is normal. We cannot allow this sort of mass surveillance. I mean, just the idea of facial recognition vans, like portable, roving facial recognition technology, that's horrible. And of course, these facial recognition things are still nowhere near accurate. There have been several documented cases of mistakes made by systems like this that have gotten people in real trouble, perfectly innocent people. Adding AI is not going to help. So this is just more evidence of a very disturbing trend across multiple Western democracies, and we've got to fight back against this before it's too late. Okay, now we've got some stories that at least have some silver linings and good aspects to them. This one's from 404 Media, and you may recall that there were some government leaks that were reported by the Washington Post, and it's important to understand that the leaker, the person who leaked the classified information, that person committed a crime. Now, there's whistleblower laws that might protect them, but reporting that data is totally legal in the United States. Doesn't matter how it was obtained. But the government didn't like this, and so they wanted to try to find the leaker. And the FBI raided the home of this Washington Post reporter and seized their iPhone, among other things, to try to investigate this leak, which that is very aggressive and not common. But as it turns out, they were not able to get into this reporter's iPhone, and let me explain why. The FBI has been unable to access a Washington Post reporter's seized iPhone because it was in lockdown mode, a sometimes overlooked feature that makes iPhones broadly more secure according to recently filed court records. The court records show what devices and data the FBI was able to ultimately access and which devices it could not after raiding the home of the reporter Hannah Nathanson in January as part of an investigation into leaks of classified information. It also provides rare insight into the apparent effectiveness of lockdown mode, or at least how effective it might be before the FBI might try other techniques to access the device. And this is a quote from that court record. It says, quote, "Because the phone was in lockdown mode, CART, C-A-R-T, which is the FBI's computer analysis response team, could not extract that device," unquote. The government obtained search warrants for Nathanson's residence, vehicle, and person to seize her electronic devices. Those warrants included language that would have legally allowed them to press Nathanson's fingers onto the devices or hold them up to her face to unlock them if biometrics were enabled. And I will definitely come back on that point at the end. Apple primarily markets lockdown mode as a feature to mitigate remote access spyware, such as that sold by companies like NSO Group to government agencies. And this is a quote from Apple on this feature. It says, quote, "To reduce the attack surface that potentially could be exploited by highly targeted mercenary spyware, certain apps, websites, and features are strictly limited for security, and some experiences might not be available at all," unquote. Essentially, lockdown mode makes some changes to how iOS works to make it harder for third parties to hack into an iPhone. It blocks most message attachment types, loads web pages differently, and stops FaceTime calls unless you've previously called that person in the last 30 days. A small section of the lockdown mode page also mentions mitigations around connecting an iPhone to an external accessory. And this is a quote from that page. It says, device connections. To connect your iPhone or iPad to an accessory or another computer, the device needs to be unlocked. To connect your Mac laptop with Apple Silicon to an accessory, your Mac needs to be unlocked and you need to provide explicit approval. Mobile forensics tools such as GrayKey and Celebrite, which law enforcement use to break into phones, work by physically connecting to a phone to then unlock them. The FBI was still able to access another of Nathanson's devices, namely a second silver MacBook Pro. And this is a quote from the record. It says, quote, once opened, the laptop asked for a Touch ID or a password, unquote. Nathanson says she does not use biometrics for her devices, but after investigators told her to try, when she applied her index finger to the fingerprint reader, the laptop unlocked. The court record says the FBI has not yet obtained a full physical image of the device, which provides an essentially complete picture of what was stored on it. But the agents did take photos and audio recordings of conversations stored in the laptop's Signal application, the court record says. Okay, so she may have actually slipped up in her OPSEC, her operational security, by having that biometric on the laptop, which was then able to compromise her Signal messages because the Signal app was on both her phone and on the laptop, and they were probably synchronized. So even though they couldn't get into her phone, apparently, to get those Signal messages because of this lockdown mode, they were able to get into the laptop. And if that laptop was synchronized with the phone, then they basically still got access to all those Signal messages. Okay, so a couple things here. First of all, the U.S. legal precedent on forcing people to unlock their devices is still fuzzy. So far, it seems pretty clear that they cannot force you to divulge a PIN code. That kind of sort of falls under the Fifth Amendment of self-incrimination. But there have been some conflicting cases, as I recall, for compelling the owner to unlock a device using biometrics. I think I've seen cases that have gone either way, and I don't think those have filtered all the way up to the Supreme Court. So it might even be regional, depending on what legal district you are in the United States. So, bottom line, if you're worried about someone trying to hack into your Apple devices, lockdown mode is a good thing to enable. Lockdown mode is really not that bad. Like you don't really notice it that much. If you're at all worried about this, I would not let Apple's verbiage about this is only for very few people bother you or put you off. Just try it. You can always turn it back off. I think it's a great idea, and I'm really glad that Apple has this available. Now, you might also want to disable biometric unlocking, or maybe you want to disable this for certain situations and then re-enable it. But also know that you can temporarily do this by just rebooting your device and leaving it locked. After you've rebooted your device, and you may have noticed this whenever your device did an update, you have to enter the PIN code to get back into your device. Biometrics don't work. And you should also know that your device, and this is true of both Android and Apple devices, are more secure after they've been rebooted or power cycled and before you first unlock them. I'm not going to get into the details, but there are technical reasons for that. So if you want your device to be absolutely secure, if you're going to a protest, if you're going through a border check, if you're in any situation where you're worried that your device might be confiscated and maybe someone's going to try to force themselves into your device to get your data, reboot your phone and don't unlock it until you're in a safe place. All right, some more good news. Google just added some really good Android anti-theft features. And this is from Lifehacker. Phones are valuable targets. If someone can steal your device, especially if they know how to break into it, they have access to a huge amount of your sensitive data. As such, good security features can mean the difference between losing that data or protecting it entirely, even if your phone is long gone. Google has a number of anti-theft features baked into Android, appropriately called theft protection features. Google announced new updates to its existing Android theft protection features, and here's what's new. First, the company announced updates to authentication safeguards, which apply to all Android devices running Android 16 or newer. That includes a new dedicated toggle in settings for failed authentication lock, which automatically locks your screen after someone tries to guess your password too many times. Now you can choose whether or not to keep this feature on right from settings. Next, Google is also increasing the amount of time your phone locks up after too many failed passcode attempts, which reduces the chance for someone to break into your phone. I wouldn't have thought of this, but Google notes that it has included protections against children that try to break into your phone by not counting identical passcode attempts against this retry limit. In other words, if someone really thinks they know what that code is, they're going to keep trying that code over and over again. But those failures, the fact that it's the exact same code over and over again, don't get counted against this limit of how many times you can try. And apparently this is something that kids often try to do. Anyway, and while it isn't new, Google highlighted that since late 2025, all features and apps that use Android's biometric prompt now work with Identity Check, which prevents unauthorized users from changing sensitive settings without a successful biometric authentication, meaning a face or fingerprint scan. The company also announced enhancements to features that are available to devices running at least Android 10. First is an update to Remote Lock, which lets you lock up your phone from a web browser if it's stolen or goes missing. Now you can set up a security question as part of the unlocking procedure. Even if someone knows your credentials, they'd need to know the answer to your security challenge before they could unlock your device. And here's a tip, and this is something I've often said too. This is in my book, actually. If you make the answer something nonsensical, you'll be even more protected. For example, what is your mother's maiden name? H7R_T*2#. In other words, it's a random gibberish thing. It's not the actual answer to the question. So just be sure to file that answer somewhere safe, like a password manager. Yes, exactly. So, it's sad that we need all these features and we need to suffer all this inconvenience, but we do. That's just where we are today. So it's good that we have these. Apple has very similar features on iPhone. But you do need to use them. Not all of these features are on by default. So make sure you check into these features and turn them on. All right, just a few more here. This one's from The Record. And it's about a California city who has decided that Flock is not for them. Police in Mountain View, California on Monday turned off 30 Flock automated license plate reader cameras after learning that the company had allowed outside agencies to search the city's database without its permission. The cameras will stay off until the Mountain View City Council can discuss how to handle the matter at a February 24th meeting, Police Chief Mike Canfield said in a letter to the community. Even with the decision on whether to reactivate the cameras apparently resting with the City Council, Canfield made clear in his letter that he opposes reactivating the cameras. This is from Canfield, who said, quote, "While the Flock Safety Pilot Program demonstrated clear value in enhancing our ability to protect our community and help us solve crimes, I personally no longer have confidence in this particular vendor. Like many of you, I was deeply disappointed to learn that Flock Safety did not meet the city's requirements regarding our data access control and transparency," unquote. The police department reportedly learned that out-of-state agencies and other police departments in California were searching its database following a public records request by a local news outlet. And let me just say, thank goodness for the Freedom of Information Act. As they prepared to answer the public records request, Mountain View Police learned that Flock had turned on a statewide lookup tool without their permission, a feature which allowed hundreds of California police departments to search their data for 17 months. Canfield also said the state learned that out-of-state agencies had illegal access to one Mountain View camera from August through November of 2024. California law bars police departments from sharing ALPR data with out-of-state agencies and bans the use of data for immigration purposes. Canfield apologized to residents for giving them false assurances that the camera's data would be shared on a limited basis, saying that he was given bad information by Flock. And one more quote from Canfield, who says, quote, "The existence of access by out-of-state agencies without the city's awareness that circumvented the protections we purposely built and believed were in place is frankly unacceptable to me and to the dedicated people of the MVPD. Furthermore, this vendor's lack of proactive disclosure is inconsistent with the standards the MVPD holds and the assurances we were given by the Flock team," unquote. Flock cameras have become an increasingly controversial issue since it has emerged that they have been used for immigration and abortion enforcement. Several cities have stopped using them, including Austin, Texas, Eugene, Oregon, Flagstaff, Arizona, and Cambridge, Massachusetts. Officials in Eugene and Cambridge publicly criticized Flock for leaving cameras there activated even after the cities had asked for them to be turned off. So, it's possible. If you don't like these cameras in your cities, fight back. There's a lot of cities that are doing this, and they are lobbying successfully for their local police and/or councils to boot these things out of the city. You might want to check out the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the EFF. They've got a great website called the Atlas of Surveillance. That might be able to tell you if you've got Flock cameras in your area. And there's also another website you might want to check out called dflock.org. I'll put both of those links in the show notes. All right, moving on. This is from the Register again. And it starts off with the word crims, which I had to read that a couple times and before I realized that it's short for criminals, which I have not often seen that used that way, so it kind of threw me off. But anyway, that's what it's saying. Crims love to make it look like their traffic, their web traffic, is actually coming from legit homes and businesses, and they do so by using residential proxy networks. Now, Google says it has significantly degraded what it believes is one of the world's largest residential proxy networks. Google's Threat Intelligence Group, or GTIG, describes IPIDEA, and I think it's IPIDEA, as a little-known component of the digital ecosystem and says that in a 7-day period in January of 2026, it observed more than 550 threat groups using IPIDEA exit nodes. GTIG said that proxy network operators sometimes pay app developers to embed proxy SDKs so that any device that downloads the app is enrolled in the network. IPIDEA is also known to distribute proxy software and SDKs that enroll devices in its network, sometimes marketed as a way for users to monetize spare bandwidth. The Googlers said that not only do these networks allow bad actors to conceal their malicious traffic, but users who enroll their devices are opening themselves up for further attacks, as their device may be used as a launchpad to compromise their other devices. Researchers said the disruption reduced IPIDEA's available pool of devices by millions, spanning smartphones, Windows PCs, and other consumer hardware, with residential IPs in the US, Canada, and Europe seen as the most desirable. Residential proxies are not illegal. Proxy operators frequently pitch them as tools for privacy or freedom of expression, although security researchers say they are overwhelmingly abused by threat actors. IPIDEA not only benefited criminals seeking anonymity, but in several cases also enrolled the same devices it recruited to its proxy network into large botnets. The security experts' work stopped short of a claim of a full takedown. GTIG says its actions reduced IPIDEA's available pool of devices by millions, and are intended to have downstream effects on affiliated operators and resellers. Okay, just real quick, these proxy networks. Basically what these devices are doing and these apps that you could put on your phone, or oftentimes these are embedded into really, really cheap set-top boxes, some of which are meant to try to gain access to content illegally. These little Android boxes that you put on your network and connect to your television are often used under the covers as these proxy networks. And what that means is it allows the bad guys to connect first to your device and then run attacks from your device out onto the broader internet, which means that it looks like those attacks are coming from your house. And it gives them access to IP addresses, just regular old household IP addresses that make it look like just you or I surfing the web or whatever. So that means that a lot of threat intelligence blocking that would know to ban a lot of IPs from a known bad VPN or from a known bad region of the world or whatever, now it basically whitewashes their traffic and makes them appear to be just a regular everyday user accessing the internet. And that's why they love to get access to these proxy networks. So Google has taken down a bunch of these. That is a very good thing. Okay, our last story of the day, and this one's about Mozilla. This is a really struggling company / organization. I love Firefox. I really want Firefox to survive. We need competition in the browser space. There are a lot of reasons for this, but they have made some really bad decisions, and I'm very worried about the company as a whole. They just got a new CEO. He's all hot on adding AI features to Firefox, but luckily, at least, they're going to give you the option to say no, and that's what this article is about. And this is from the Hacker News. Mozilla on Monday announced a new controls section in its Firefox desktop browser settings that allows users to completely turn off generative artificial intelligence, or Gen AI features. And this is a quote from someone at Firefox who says, quote, "It provides a single place to block current and future generative AI features in Firefox. You can also review and manage individual AI features if you choose to use them. This lets you use Firefox without AI while we continue to build AI features for those who want them," unquote. Mozilla first announced its plans to integrate AI into Firefox in November of 2025, stating it's fully opt-in and that it's incorporating the technology while placing users in the driver's seat. The new feature is expected to be rolled out with Firefox 148, which is scheduled to be released on February 24th, 2026. Mozilla said user choice is crucial as more AI features are baked into web browsers, adding that it believes in giving people control regardless of how they feel about the technology. And another quote from the Mozilla rep who says, quote, "If you don't want to use AI features from Firefox at all, you can turn on the Block AI Enhancements toggle. When it's toggled on, meaning you've turned AI off, you won't see pop-ups or reminders to use existing or upcoming AI features," unquote. Last month, Mozilla's new CEO, Anthony Enzor DeMeo, said the company's focus will be on becoming a trusted software company that gives users agency in how its products work. And I'll finish with a quote from Anthony who says, quote, "Privacy, data use, and AI must be clear and understandable. Controls must be simple. AI should always be a choice, something people can easily turn off," unquote. I absolutely agree, and I really wish other companies would follow suit. And starting with freaking Microsoft. Oh my God. Copilot is everywhere, not just in the operating system, but in every one of Microsoft's apps, and it's a real pain to turn off. Drives me nuts. So anyway, while I'm still worried about Mozilla and I'm not really down with their focus on AI everywhere, at least they're going to give you one big button to say no. Okay, so speaking of AI, that brings us to our tip of the week. And I wrote an article on my blog, which you definitely should read, because I'm not going to get into that much detail here, but it's called Agents of Misfortune. And this is all about agentic AI. Recently, I wrote about AI chatbots and how you really have to be careful with your privacy. And I'm not going to get too much into that now because we talked about it then and you can read that article. But basically, you really need to be very careful of giving private information to any cloud-based AI. Not only because that data is going off to the cloud provider who could save it forever, or could mistakenly save it forever, or could mistakenly make it available, like we've already seen today. Even if they have the best intentions, they may still screw it up. So you definitely don't want that information getting loose. And a lot of them, honestly, are clamoring for any data they can get their hands on to train their future AI models. And if you're not careful, that data may be your private conversations. But we have now moved on to a new phase of AI, and this is the realm of what we're calling agentic AI, giving agency to these artificial intelligence tools like large language models and chatbots and similar tools, giving them the ability to effect changes in the real world. And as we're going to see today, acting on your behalf, like as you. In other words, you give these AI agents access to your account credentials, banking information, or credit card information. And yeah, it's powerful. Instead of asking an AI to help you plan a trip to Europe, you can have it go book everything for you. And look, I'm just going to, again, state for the record, I use AI. I use it carefully. I use some cloud-based AI, but I never give it personal information. I have also used local-only AI, and I've used privacy-respecting AI like Lumo, if and when I decide I might need to do something slightly personal. I'm still very, very careful. But what I would absolutely not do, not today, is give any of these tools access to my credentials, full permissions on my computer to control anything on my computer at its whim, and give it access to my financial information so it could buy things on my behalf. Even though I would love to someday do that. I grew up with Star Trek and Star Wars and the Jetsons. I've read all the Isaac Asimov robot books. When I watched the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix, which was very prescient, by the way, and very worth watching, it's like over 10 years old already. Despite the obvious social warnings against the use of this kind of AI and the problems it could bring, I still find myself wanting that kind of technology. And I believe someday we will get there. Particularly, I'm looking forward to a future where all of this AI processing happens on my device that I can control and secure. I want a virtual AI assistant someday. But this feature is being rolled out quickly and in many weird and crazy ways. And the one that really got me to write this article was this new thing called ClawdBot. And that's CLAWD bot, which is a play on words for Claude, the Anthropic large language model. And it turns out that Anthropic didn't like that name, so they immediately changed it to Moltbot, and then very quickly after that changed it to OpenClaw. So you may have heard this one thing referred to by any of those three names. It's all the same thing. This apparently was released in November by a smart guy who's done some other cool stuff in the past. But the idea being, you download this tool, you hook it up to some other cloud-based AIs like Anthropic's Claude and Google's Gemini and OpenAI's ChatGPT. So you have to give it access to those accounts first. But this thing works as an agent on your behalf. You give it full, complete godlike permissions for your computer and then start giving it access to your accounts. And then you could do really crazy things like send it a message and say, hey, go book me a flight to Washington, D.C. for next week. And it can just go do all those things for you, including probably booking your hotel along the way. And yeah, I get how that's really convenient and cool. But this whole thing went real crazy real quick. And reading about this and reading people's comments about it, I can't get over how many times I saw the phrase YOLO. In other words, you only live once. Throw caution to the wind. This is so cool. I'm going to give this thing access to everything. I love it. I can't believe all the cool things this thing could do for me. Well, shockingly, we've already had a lot of really bad problems with this, and I'm sure it's just going to get worse. And I encourage you to read the article. There's some really just crazy stuff. There's been bad security problems with this system. People have been trusting it to do things they had no business doing. So anyway, the bottom line here is there's going to be a lot of, kind of viral, cool tools and applications that are going to be going around that are going to ask you to give agency to these AI systems to let them do more on your behalf. I really hope that like Apple in particular, but hopefully also Google and Microsoft, come up with safe, private ways to build these features into their systems and have some guardrails on these things. But there's a lot of stuff going out there now with zero guardrails, zero reputation, and you just really, really need to be careful. I hope we get there someday, but we are not there yet. So bottom line is be very, very careful with these things. And I would honestly, unless you really, really know what you're doing, I would recommend against it. Now, I also had an interesting proposal around this that I think might make it safer. The crux of which is instead of making these agents a copy or a clone of you, your doppelganger, make a separate persona. Think of it like, a virtual executive assistant. It's not you, but it's somebody who can review some of your things at a very limited level. Oftentimes it's a read-only access where they kind of filter stuff for you, but don't really like send emails on your behalf or send messages on your behalf as you. And I think we need to be formalizing this notion of agents and making them a separate entity with their own sets of permissions, their own guardrails, and treat them as a separate entity. So anyway, I've got some ideas on that. If you're curious, you can read the whole article. So there you go. There's your news and your tip of the week. All right, that's going to do it for this week, everybody. A couple quick things before we go. Again, next week, I'm going to give you some highlights of some of the listener survey responses and what I'm doing to address them. There were definitely some interesting ideas in there, and I'm already following up on them. For my top patrons on Thursday for this week's Merlin's Musings, I'm going to talk probably a little bit more about these agentic AI ideas that I've had. So stay tuned for that. And looking ahead, I just got done interviewing Nick Merrill, who's the CEO and founder of Freely. He also came from the Calyx Institute. He's got a very interesting background in privacy and technology around privacy. And he has launched a cell phone service here in the US that is set up such that it could not know anything about you. And that's something we have not had in the US, even though, thankfully, so far, the US is one of the countries still left on the planet that doesn't require you to register your ID against a SIM card. Knock on wood, that is probably coming at some point, but as of now anyway, we don't have the KYC that a lot of other countries do when it comes to cell phone accounts. So it allows him to do some interesting things, and we're going to talk about that. And then one of your comments in my listener survey prompted me to do this, and I've been wanting to do it for a while, but it kind of clinched the deal. You said I should do more crossover podcasts. And in particular, you thought that I should invite Nate and Jonah from Privacy Guides onto the show. And so I have done that, and we are going to be recording an episode that will be a lot of fun. And now I can reveal and say, drumroll please, that I have booked an interview with Cindy Cohen, who is the current head of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. She's been there since 2015. Prior to that, 15 years prior to that, she was a top lawyer for the EFF. She's got an amazing history. She's got a book coming out. We're going to talk about all of that as she is retiring this year. I've been wanting her on the show for a very long time, so I'm super excited. That will be coming up soon. So there's a lot of great stuff to look forward to. Subscribe and you won't miss anything. Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there. And until next time, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.